how can it be so darn difficult to paint loosely in watercolor? I mean, that's the heart and soul of watercolor, loose and whimsical and free. Yet when you try to do it, it looks like a creative dumpster fire. Spoiler freaking alert, it doesn't have to be so difficult. I haven't always painted like you see on this channel. Starting as a teenager, I thought realism was where it's at. But there was a rumbling in my soul for something different. I definitely wanted my own style, and I felt something weird and wonderful starting to happen. But it didn't always look so wonderful on the page. It took many years and tears to figure out my loose style. Today we're painting a step-by-step watercolor guarantee of sorts. I have 4 techniques that will loosen up your watercolors fast so you don't struggle like I did for years. Number 1, press and lift. Number 2, scrub. Number 3, long hold, trace. And number 4, juicy geometry. Let's get into it. Press and tap or press and lift is just like what it sounds. You're pressing onto the paper and lifting quickly. And you're going to notice here, I am twisting and turning and almost rolling that paintbrush between my fingers. Now I'm pressing harder. I'm letting the paint run out. So while the way you use the brush here is important, also what's on your brush, how much water, you can kind of experiment with all those different levels. Again, another hard press, another little scratchy wiggle when I'm pressing down. But the idea is quickness, immediacy. Press, lift, get out. Here's a little bit less pressure on the left-hand side of the page here, and just using a more kind of horizontal movement, but it's all a version of press and tap or press and lift. Think of ways you could use this in your looser paintings. It would be great for centers of flowers that have a lot of texture. It'd be great for like shrubbery in the distance of a landscape or in the foreground. And friends, I'm talking like once and done, one layer done. That's what these strokes are meant for. That's one of the keys of loose watercolor painting, is realizing that you might only be going in with one layer and calling her done. So your strokes have to mean a lot. Your strokes have to be super expressive. And expressive strokes are often born out of brevity. Moving on. Scrub. This is going to create kind of a scratchy effect on your paper. And if manhandling your brush makes you nervous, you might want to grab a brush that's seen a lot of use, that you don't mind being a little rough with. Heading in with a green, don't overthink which color. And I do recommend trying out these techniques separate from a painting session. But don't worry, we are going to have a painting session. I'm going to turn these into an actual painting, all 4 techniques, really soon. So scrub, you're swirling, you're scratching, you're mixing up the colors. You're using a very haphazard approach to laying the color down, almost like you are using sandpaper, but instead of sandpaper, it's the bristles of your brush, just scrubbing them, moving them roughly across and over the page. You're going to notice very quickly different textures depending on how much water is on your brush, different looks depending on how much paint is on your brush. For example, the blue here, I've got a lot of blue, but not a lot of water, and it looks very different than my first strokes. Tip number 2 for painting loose with confidence, exercise. I mentioned practice makes perfect, can also make you nervous. But I also mentioned earlier that we need to do this again and again and again. So take these techniques out of the context of an actual painting and just try them out. Fill pages with them. Grab whatever scraps you have and then fill them up with scrubbing. Fill them up with press and lift. All right. Let's go on to technique number 3. Wait, just kidding. Before we do, could you please give this video a boop if you're having a good time and you feel like we're getting somewhere or you had an aha moment? I would appreciate it so much. It really helps out the channel. Long hold trace is my long-winded title for a technique that produces some of the most whimsical lines you'll ever put to paper. Here's the idea. You hold your brush way out on the tip and you make your marks, and that forces you to be super messy. You're going to kind of feel like a kid, like it doesn't look right. It feels very juvenile, but that is the point. You're teaching your hand-eye coordination to adjust to a hold that will produce much more whimsical, childlike marks, no matter what you do. By holding your brush all the way out at the tip, you're relinquishing almost all control. And again, pay attention to how much water is on your brush versus how much paint's on your brush. You're going to get a different look every time. This one is probably going to feel the most uncomfortable for you if you've not tried it before, but please stick with me. I promise this one is also the most rewarding. Paint loose with confidence, tip number 3, and it's a little bit more of a warning. This technique is not only going to most likely make you feel a little uncomfortable, but the results are also going to feel most likely ugly to your eye. It's okay. We will push through this. You got this. We are so close to taking all of these techniques and tips and turning them into an actual painting. But first, technique number 4, juicy geometry. Okay, here we go. Make a shape, any shape, with one color. Then rinse your brush a little, grab another color, and fill it in. That is juicy geometry. What I hope you've started to notice now that we're on the last technique is that each technique has a different scale to the brush stroke it makes. Some are really tiny, some are kind of speckly and scratchy. Juicy geometry is really big and bold and covers a lot of the paper and so on. So you can imagine when these all come together in one loose composition, they create a lot of interest. Yeah, you're starting to see it now. All right. So fill your page. I've got some really lazy rectangles here already. I've got circles. I've got, I don't know, triangles, diamonds, trapezoids, whatever they are. The point is get comfortable with using your brush and covering more surface area. Now you'll notice I did switch to a larger dagger brush. Painting loose with confidence. Tip number 4. Don't be afraid to get messy. If you have just started this journey to loosen up your watercolor, all the things are likely going to feel out of control. And one of them is going to be paint on your hands, water splotches happening way more than you're used to, and so on and so on. Be prepared for it. Take a breath. You're okay. Time for the paint along, friends. Now, I used to paint more realistically when I was younger, and then I got into the loosey-goosiness of watercolor and loved it. And then in 2020, I started creating pieces like this that were going back to my more realistic roots. So today I am taking this piece and I'm going to recreate it twice using only the techniques I showed you earlier. My palette will be limited. I'm probably only going to use about 3 or 4 colors max. That limitation will help keep my brain quiet and calm. And I'm going back to one brush. All right, spoiler alert, we're going to do 2 of these, so I'm splitting my 9x12 paper down the middle. Grab your first color. And I'm thinking about my background, but leaving the white paper to recreate this magnolia. So I'm going to do the long hole trace to create my flower shape. And remember, it's going to look weird because it does. I mean, look at it. It looks weird, but just go with it. All right, rinsing, grabbing another color. I'm still in the long hold trace, recreating that rusty looking leaf and just continuing on. I seem to really like this long hold trace. I told you this one would end up probably being one of your favorites once you got used to the feeling of it. All right, tap and lift, press and lift for the center of the flower. And I'm just kind of twisting that brush back and forth. I want you to think about simplification. That is key when you are translating a more realistic painting into a much more loose painting. You're really paring down basic shapes, basic structure, or composition. All right, I'll give you a second to guess this one. Yep. It's the scrubbing technique. So I'm just using this technique to fill in a shape that looks like one of the leaves from my reference painting. Great for filling shapes that you made earlier with your long hold trace. All right, this green leaf in the bottom right corner, I'm still scrubbing, but notice it's a bouncier scrub, and I'm using it to make a fairly specific shape. Also playing around with letting that paint run out with that last mark I just made. All right, so this is a version of juicy geometry because the inspiration painting has a very profound, intense blue background. So I'm going to use that technique the way that I showed it to you earlier. I'm just not creating shapes per se. I'm filling in the shape that was left behind after I drew or sketched or scrawled out my weird looking magnolia. I also want you to keep in mind as you do this exercise that it's not about the technique being perfectly beautiful. So for example, we are filling in a lot of space here with blue. I don't want you to focus too much on making it smooth or making it the perfect coverage. I just want you to focus on quickly getting the impression, the loose impression of your inspiration painting down. You can always come back later, do this again, and focus more on the execution of applying big areas of blue more smoothly, but in a loose style. All right, and I'm just going back in for more press and lift, tap and lift to add a little bit more dimension to the center of the flower. Really important with the loose watercolor style. And because these are usually executed more quickly, you're going to want to make sure that before you make any big decisions or before you get too bogged down in painting on this thing for a long period of time, that you get away from it, look at it from a distance. All right, let's try this again. Yup, going back to the bigger dagger brush. Grabbing some green here, not really thinking too much about anything except I want to use a technique I haven't used yet, which is the juicy geometry. All right, I technically used it earlier, but I want to use it more traditionally. And I'm just carving out some shapes. They're like soft-edged diamonds, if you will. I've got more than one color on my brush. Not by design, just because my brush wasn't clean. And I'm making a bunch of shapes here. And again, just looking back at the reference and trying to loosely capture the basic structure of where the leaves rest in the composition. All right, now I'm using the tap and lift, press and lift, very quick, very immediate strokes. I'm not spending hardly any time on each press action, but I am quickly and often looking back at my inspiration piece to see where I'm trying to make these marks. I even made a bigger press and lift mark, a much more bold mark with more coverage in the upper left and right corners there. So think about that too. The bigger the brush, the more impact that one press is going to have. All right, now I'm just tossing it all the wind. I did not plan on this, but I'm bringing in a pencil because it just feels right. And I am using an overhand hold on my pencil. If you're not new to this channel, you know what I'm talking about. It's where you hold that pencil in a very non-traditional way, where your whole hand is kind of over the top of the pencil. It's less control. So that's definitely what we need here. And have fun with this. One of my favorite things to do is run graphite pencil through wet watercolor. So I've given myself lots of opportunities to do that. Back to some juicy geometry here with a fun pink and just filling in those pencil sketched shapes that I created earlier. Now, you may not agree with me, but this is my second attempt within a small window of time. And already I feel more comfortable with, number one, the sloppiness of this. It actually feels pretty beautiful to me, tentatively beautiful. Number two, I already feel like my arm, my hand, my wrist, my fingers are more loose, and that's a beautiful thing. Imagine if you did 10 of these, how you would feel. Imagine if you gave yourself 4 or 5 minutes for 10 paintings each. So you're giving yourself an hour to be uncomfortable. You're sitting in your uncomfortable paintingness for an hour max. Imagine how much better you'd feel in your hands. Imagine how much care you would no longer have for the splashes of water and paint that might be everywhere. Imagine how much better and more accomplished you would feel in this loose painting thing. So yeah, practice makes perfect, but it also makes you way more comfortable with something that only a few minutes ago felt so weird.